Welcome back to this quick start guide, where in part 2 we will be going over many of the topics we have not yet covered in relation to getting you up and running with a campaign, either as a player or as a dungeon master. This part of the guide assumes that you have already watched the first part of this particular quick start guide. If you have not, I highly recommend following the link in the description below and watch that part first. And that is because many of the topics we are going to cover in this video might be quite confusing if you have not yet watched the first video and are not yet really familiar with Fantasy Grounds at this particular point in time. So let's go ahead and continue on with the rest of the guide. As the DM, once your players have their characters ready to go, and in this case I'm using one player session to manage 4 characters, so this is going to be interesting, you want to make sure that you add them to the party sheet, and that is accessible from this particular button here. And all you do is you open up each individual character, and it doesn't matter whether you grab the token or the portrait, you just simply want to make sure they get added to the party sheet, much like this. And the main tab of this particular party sheet is going to allow you to execute group-based ability and skill checks, as well as saving throws, and even make a party attack, although I do admit I don't think I've ever used that particular option just yet. These roles can be kept hidden from the players, and depending on whether you have a visibility value here or an invisible or faded out value here, will determine whether you're making use of the tower or whether things are going to be visible, but at the same time, whether you're still showing the dice rolls as the Dungeon Master. In this particular case, I'm hiding all of the rolls as the Dungeon Master. So when I click this toggle, it's just making a switch between utilization of the dice tower versus simply not showing the rolls. It is also where you're going to divvy out things like experience points through an encounter or quest parcel when making use of the XP tab, as well as giving the party their loot when making use of the inventory tab and dropping in loot parcels. For experience points that are simply being awarded through an encounter or quest completion parcel, which is what I call these things here, all you have to do is drag and drop it onto the XP sheet, or tab I should say, and then go ahead and click this award button. And as you can see, all of our party members have now acquired experience points. I do believe they went up by 25 points each. You can then go ahead and clear out any item that you've already awarded if you don't feel like you need to leave it there, or you can just simply leave it there, and it will always maintain a little checkbox to indicate that you've awarded it. So I'll go ahead and do that again. You can see that there's now a checkbox there. The exact same thing happens with quest parcels, but instead of clicking this award button, you click this one. And when you drag a quest parcel into place, so if I go ahead and do this, for example, when I click the award, the experience points still go to the party and they're evenly divvied out between all of the characters, but the same concept occurs. Now, when it comes to loot parcels, you simply drag them into the inventory sheet, much like I did with the XP and quest items. And you can then use this divvy button down here at the bottom to ensure that the coins are equally divided out to all of the players. So in this particular case, if I do this, all of the coins will be evenly divided out, and any non-divisible by 4 in this particular case coins will remain in the actual selection to be divvied out at a future point in time when more coins are added to the pile. When it comes to items, however, there are 2 ways that these can be divvied out. Players can simply drag them into their own character's inventory right from this particular inventory tab. Players do have access to see that, as long as the selection is enabled. Or you can assign it by typing the player's name here in this particular assignment slot and then clicking this divvy button in order to ensure that it gets deployed out to a specific player. However, in the event that there are items left that the party just simply wants to sell off at the first time that they get to a town or the next time that they get to a town, all you have to do is choose the percentage value of that particular item that you think the merchant is going to go ahead and offer the players, and then simply click this button here to sell them off. That will add that particular item in coin value over into the parcel coins. And once you've got enough coins over here, you can once again just simply click this distribute button and it will go through and equally divide all of the coins that are left here across all of the players if it can do so. Now, as I said earlier, as the Dungeon Master, your role is to referee the various encounters that the party is going to run up against, and this can sometimes include combat-related encounters. So Fantasy Grounds Unity has something called a combat tracker, which is accessible by this button up here with the crossed swords. And this is where you're going to add all of your characters in order to be able to run a particular combat scenario. All you have to do is simply pop open the character sheet and drag and drop them either by their token or by their portrait into the combat tracker. I'm just going to go ahead and get this done quickly here. And what it will do is on the Dungeon Master side, you'll be able to see a large number of different things associated with this particular character, including their stats, whether they're about to go through and react, what their initiative roll bonus is, things like that, what their movement is, pretty much everything that you need in order to manipulate this particular character on a particular map or location that you're going to run them through. When it comes to NPCs, however, you're going to get something called an encounter parcel. And then in order to ensure that any creature that's in this encounter parcel is properly added into the combat tracker, you just click this little button down here and it will automatically throw them into place. Now, one thing that I will point out a little bit later on when we deal with the map is this section down here. These particular creatures are not assigned to a map, which means they don't have a little checkbox to indicate that they have pre-placement involved when it comes to actually going through and putting them on the map. And that is primarily because this first Goblin Ambush is meant to be a theater of mind-based combat, although there are images that you can find online that people have created that you can convert this into an actual visual encounter by using those maps. Once all the tokens are there, a number of things now become possible, including adding characters to a map, which I'll explain shortly. In addition to that, the combat tracker will contain all party members involved in the encounter, as well as any creatures, objects, which can be traps, or even difficult terrain or fissures that might exist in terrain, things like that, as well as NPCs that the party might be encountering. And in this particular instance, I've got these 4 goblins. And you'll see that once a non-party member character has been added to the combat tracker, it's automatically going to roll the initiative for those creatures. However, when it comes to things like lair actions or even some traps, those are going to have a static value and will maintain that value when they're added to the combat tracker. Now, players will need to roll the initiative as well, and they can do that by simply going to the main tab of their character sheet and clicking on this little dice roll here, or you can make the roll for them by going ahead and selecting this icon at the 9 o'clock area of this particular radial menu, and then rolling depending on the type of roll that you want to have done, or you can just simply clear all initiative rolls. And this will then allow combat to ensue, and you can do this through activating something I've been calling an action token, either by clicking on this next actor button down here, simply dragging this particular token up to a particular creature, or simply clicking on the pip that's next to that particular creature or player. Now, in this particular case, the combat tracker always displays the highest initiative roll at the top of the combat tracker and works its way down. But the combat tracker also has other capabilities. I periodically will use the combat tracker to control player movement through their initiative roll when I need to really slow things down due to the complexity of a given map. And it gives me time to get things set up and in place before the players run into a specific area. So if they're heading in a specific direction, then I can preload all of the NPCs or traps or whatever that they're going to run into as they move towards that area. And because of this little invisibility button down here, they're not going to know that they've been added to the map or to the combat tracker because there are visibility values in play. They simply don't become visible to the players until you're ready to do so. Now, when it comes to maps and images, any map or image that is available through the Assets panel or through the various story elements, such as maps or images that might exist there, let's say Cragmaw Hideout. I'm just going to pop this open here. I need to go through and reset this, so ignore the visibility factor there. We'll come to that later. All you really have to do is pop open the image in question and then go through, right-click on the map, and head to this 9 o'clock location called Sharing. Click that, and then once again go to the 9 o'clock of the sub-radial menu and click Share Record. And what will happen is that you'll see icons show up down here in the bottom left corner of that map, and then the players will see a blacked out screen if visibility and line of sight are enabled, and not know what it is other than it's black on their screen. And that actually looks like this. And images can be shared out the exact same way. But there's one thing that I want to point out about images. Once you're done sharing the image, you can either go through the radial menu again to unshare that image, or you can simply go down here and click on this all button to narrow it down to those that are shared. And you'll see a little P icon here, or public. To remove that image from being shared, in this case it's going to be the map, all you do is click on that and it will unshare it from anybody that it was currently shared to. There is one thing that I want to note about maps, and I find this extremely irritating personally. This little button here goes through and actually snaps this to the background. The problem is once you do that, the sharing option goes away, and I don't know why. It irritates me to no end because then I have to go back and unsnap this and then go ahead and share it again. But you can snap this once to set it up so that it just covers this particular area, or you can snap it again so that it becomes full screen. That way, you can have windows floating over top of this, but at the same time, you can simply go ahead and see nothing but the map, and it hides all other elements associated with it that aren't a floating element, such as these icons here, or the combat tracker, or some form of story note that you need to refer to. I like both methods, although I'm still getting used to this particular method personally. As you can see here, I'm utilizing Cragmaw Hideout for the purposes of this demonstration, as it's a quite easy map to get used to, and it's more or less one of the very first ones you'll generally run into depending on the direction your players have chosen to go in. Map panels themselves can be stretched out much like any other panel that is available within Fantasy Grounds Unity. You can do that by grabbing it here at the corner, potentially grabbing it at the side, or holding down the Control and Alt keys at the same time and then just clicking with the left mouse button and moving the window like this. All three options work really nicely, and this particular option is really nice when you unintentionally move the top bar off the screen and can't quite access the window anymore. Not that I've personally done that. No, not at all. Now, when it comes to moving around on the map, that functions a little bit differently, and the best method that I have found is through the use of the middle mouse button. And all I'm doing is pressing down on the middle mouse button, and I can move things around. So if I zoom in into an area, I can continue to move the map around. The other option is to use this by left-clicking on that and then dragging your mouse around. But as you can see, it works well, but I find it a little bit clunky, and I prefer the middle mouse button because things move a little bit smoother and I can move them a little bit quicker. Adding characters to a map is handled directly from the combat tracker, and what you're going to want to do is drag and drop from that particular combat tracker directly by grabbing their icon. And then you just drop them in place on the map, and what they should do is snap to a particular location on that map. And I'm going to move these into the middle square, otherwise my OCD is just going to go absolutely bonkers on me. I have something called Player Vision Preview Mode currently turned on for this map. If I turn it off, you can see the entirety of the map as the Dungeon Master, but the players can't, and they will only see areas on the map that they have previously visited or have seen visibly in the past. If you turn this feature on, you will see exactly what that particular player has seen. Now, I've used this character pretty much all over the place, so they're able to see a little bit further into this map than the other three characters are, except for Gibbles. The other factor is their position. As you can see, as I move them around, their line of sight adjusts based on the placement on the map. Watch what happens when I drag Vernia up into this particular portion of the cave. You will see that they don't get to see what is going on in that cave, and that's because they can't see in the dark. An option to deal with that is for that particular character to bring out a torch. And what that does is it enables, come on, combat tracker, there you go. It enables an effect associated with that torch to light up the area that's immediately around them. And all you do is you drag and drop that effect into place, and then all of a sudden they can see things on the map. And as I move them around, that area will slowly reveal, depending on where they go. Now, when they're outside, they can see fine as long as there's ambient light set up and ready to show them the area. But if there's no ambient visibility or it's extremely dark, then they're going to lose that visibility unless they bring out a torch or some other form of light source. And players do have the ability to drag that particular torch icon onto their own character as they need to. There are two things that are coming into play. The first is called line of sight, and This is what is preventing someone from seeing through objects if there is no ability technically to see through them. So you can see that I can't see through this cave wall with this particular character, nor can I see through this what's classified as terrain. And that is because my character's not in the terrain. But once I go into the terrain, I can see through it. Even if it's only a little bit of a corner past through that particular terrain. I think it's over here is where that character has to be in order to see out here. But in any event, you can see that it blocks that particular character's ability to see through that. And as I move them around, their visibility will adjust. Now, it looks like this particular character can't see in the dark either. The second feature that's coming into play is token lighting and vision. And this is what is controlling how far a character sees on a given map, out to the range of a given character's vision capability. So if a character has dark vision of, say, range of 60 feet, then they're going to be able to see 60 feet in the dark. However, if they only have a dark vision of 30 feet or no vision at all when it comes to dark vision, then they're not going to see anything, or they're only going to see 30 feet into the dark. And this is where torches come into play, because it now lights up that area that a character wouldn't necessarily normally be able to see, because there's now a light source providing some level of visibility for that particular character. Anyone who has dark vision, though, when there is a light source, will see the map as if that map was out in the daylight when there's a light source. But if I move that light source out of the way, you can see now that it's grayscaled. And that is because that's what dark vision looks like. That's how the map portrays that. Now, I'm going to very quickly remove these particular goblins here because they are not associated with this particular portion of the map. So I'm going to delete foes only. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up this pin here and drag this particular group of goblins into place. Now, you can see here, there are checkboxes. I've now added them to the combat tracker, but something else has also happened. They're also now on the map, and that's because they had the check marks, which tells me they were placed on this map. Many, if not all of the official modules, will have these preloaded for the most part. However, there are still some circumstances where it's expected that the Dungeon Master would place them on the map to more or less provide a little bit of placement variety. Now, these goblins can't see outside of that particular area because they are blocked by these thickets. But if this goblin were to move into this particular thicket, they'd be able to see out there. When it comes to the players, they can't see them either unless they go into here, but you'll notice that they're still not visible. And that's because there is still one extra step that you probably should take care of before you allow the players to move around, and that is to set something called sensitive visibility or mask sensitive visibility. And what that does is it will set it up so that players can see a particular token if that particular token is visible to them. Now, that one became visible because there's a little sliver of this terrain here which told this character that that particular character, the goblin too, was in the terrain. Well, characters can see what's in the terrain, but they can't see what's on the other side of that terrain. So that's why that became visible. So if I put them there and I go there, they can see that goblin. But if I put that goblin there, they can't see that. All a player really has to do is move around, and then those particular goblins become visible. So as the visibility aspect of it comes around, so there is some form of line of sight to that particular goblin, it becomes visible to the player. So I've gone ahead and set things up so that we can execute a particular combat scenario here, just so that you can see how the combat tracker is going to work. Gibbles is our first actor, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to the player screen and show you what that looks like. He has a movement capability here where he can move up to the goblins. I'm going to approve that as the Dungeon Master and move him into range. I'm then going to target Goblin 1, and I can do that either on the map or through the combat tracker here. Doesn't matter. I'm holding down the control key while left-clicking on the token here in both cases. And then I'm going to pop open Gibbles' character sheet and open up the action tab here. I'm just going to reduce that a little bit. Now, I admit this is a level 20 character going up against a goblin, so this is going to be relatively quick. I'm going to shoot this short bow at that goblin. No, actually, I'm going to use the melee weapon because otherwise I'm going to suffer disadvantage in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and roll. This is almost guaranteed to be a hit. In fact, it is. I am then going to go ahead and roll damage. And you can see here that our goblin has now been knocked unconscious. it is technically dying. And by the rules of 5th edition, technically that creature is actually dead. It should be removed from the combat tracker as well as from the map. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. It depends on the situation. Now, to simulate level 1 characters here, I'm going to end Gibbles' turn, and I'm going to do that by hitting this turn complete button down here. That's now going to give Goblin 1 the turn. Well, it's dead. So, Dungeon Master is going to move that to Goblin 2. Now, on the Dungeon Master screen, what you can see here is all of the actions that this Goblin can actually do. And Goblin 2 here is going to target Gibbles. And you can see that they're now targeted. Actually, for some reason, Durgan has Gibbles targeted. I'm going to remove that. And then I'm going to target Gibbles from the Goblin. There we go. I'm then going to try to attack Gibbles, which is obviously going to be a miss. And because of that, that's going to end this particular Goblin's turn. Now, theoretically, because these two Goblins should have been on watch, they should have been able to see these characters much further out and have been able to have made a couple of ranged attacks before the characters closed in. But they weren't necessarily paying too much attention. Now, Vernia, I'm just simply going to have Vernia keep an eye on this tunnel to make sure that nothing comes out. So she's going to essentially ready an action in case something comes out from that area based on the sounds due to combat. Durgan, on the other hand, is going to definitely get involved. He is going to make use of one of his spells. So I'm going to move this over to here, pop open Durgan, go down to actions, and let's see. I'm going to use Divine Strike. So I'm going to set this into combat and actions mode, and you can see here that there is an effect for Divine Strike. Divine Strike is something that can be added to an existing combat melee weapon or anything like that before damage is rolled. So, I'm going to select Durgan, I'm going to target Goblin 2, and then I'm going to use the Warhammer to attack that Goblin. That is definitely going to be a hit. But before I roll damage, I'm going to want to make sure that I add this effect to my character. And then I'm going to roll damage. Now, this is pretty much going to insta-gib that Goblin, which means that Bluebell doesn't really have anything else to do. I suppose Bluebell could go up here and deal with any encounters that might crop up in this particular scenario, but for this particular situation, combat is essentially done. However, to show you what a spell looks like, I have quote-unquote temporarily resurrected Goblin 2 again. I'm now going to have Bluebell make an attack against that, and this time it's going to be with a range spell. I'm going to move them up here, just for clarity. I'm going to have them target Goblin 2, which they don't have yet, so there we go. Select there. Oh, that's because the window is in the way. There we go. So they're now targeting Goblin 2, and then I'm going to pop open Bluebell's action sheet here. And I'm going to cast Chromatic Orb on that particular target. So I'm going to change this to combat and action once again. Oh, right, I don't have Chromatic Orb prepared. So in this case, I'll just use Firebolt. So I'm going to cast that spell. Works very much like a melee attack. This hits. And then I'm going to roll the damage, and it's going to apply that damage to that particular goblin. In this particular case, that goblin's not dead. But as you can see, it's a very simple process to go through and control the flow of combat by utilizing this combat tracker. And movement can also be done this way, in the sense that if you want to really get to learn how to use the combat tracker, you can use it for movement throughout a particular map so that the players can only move on their turn. That way you don't have players going off in all different directions all at the same time, and then you're quickly having to uncover the story elements for all of those areas. By controlling their movement, a player can move into that area, you pop open that story element, explain what that particular player sees, and then move on to the next player. It's a great way for a new Dungeon Master to get used to the whole process of dealing with character movement. Something I wanted to point out about the goblins before we moved on. In relation to the actions that a particular goblin has, if you have questions as to what a given creature has, you can always click on this link icon over here on the right side of the screen and pop open their stat block. Down at the bottom, it's going to explain the various options and features that you can make use of, as well as how frequently they will come back. So, for example, a Dragon's Breath weapon there's a roll every time their turn comes around to see if that particular breath weapon has been recovered, and that will be reflected within the combat tracker to state that it's available again. If it's not available, there's a little indicator stating it's not. So there's a lot of little things that Fantasy Grounds takes care of for you as the Dungeon Master so that you don't always have to keep track of things. Now, to close off this example, I'm going to go ahead and give the party their experience points. So I'm going to pop that open, go back to here, gain access to the story pin so that I can get at this encounter and drop it onto here and award it out to the party. So very simple, very easy methodology when it comes to dealing with that. Now, this should give you enough information to get you going within Fantasy Grounds Unity, but we are really just scratching the surface in relation to what Fantasy Grounds Unity can actually do. All of the items, encounters, NPCs, everything that you need to gain access to as the Dungeon Master, as well as all of the class information, skills, and spells that you need to gain access to as a player are all available right through this side menu. And there are a lot more things that Fantasy Grounds can do that are outside of the scope of this particular Quickstart guide. So you can use the wiki links below to gain access to that. And I really do want to thank you for watching this particular video, both on behalf of myself as well as Smiteworks. I also want to thank Smiteworks for providing me with the opportunity to present this information on their channel, as well as the continued support of several of their staff members, and I look forward to continuing with our collaboration. I hope you found the information within this video useful to getting you started with Fantasy Grounds Unity, and if you have any questions or comment about this video, please use the comment section below to post them, and Smiteworks and I will do our best to answer any questions that require a response. Please also click on that like button if you did find the information in this video useful to you in learning how to use Fantasy Grounds Unity, and consider subscribing to the Smiteworks Fantasy Grounds YouTube channel to keep up to date with new content as it is released.